Okay, so welcome everyone. It's a great honor to have you all with us. As Joan mentioned, my name is Daniel Roth. I'm the director of the Pardes Center for Judaism and Conflict Resolution. And I want to introduce Rabbi Dr. Chaim Kaminsky, who's our speaker today. It's a huge honor to have him with us. I'm extremely excited. Chaim has been for the last several years a senior research scholar in our Center for Judaism and Conflict Resolution, during which time he has played a really important role in helping us develop materials for schools, in giving us advice on so many different levels, sharing his wisdom, and most significantly, he has taken this time to transform his fantastic doctorate that he wrote at Columbia University's Teachers College several years ago, and to turn it into what's even a more impressive and impactful book that we're going to be learning together tonight, Fundementals of Jewish Conflict Resolution. This is I believe, an opportunity to both learn about the book and to have a chance to talk and ask questions from Chaim. We encourage that you have a chance to not just hear a little bit about it right now, but to get the copy of this book. I think it's a wonderful resource both for personal growth and for institutional growth that I believe can have a tremendous impact on your communities. So without any further ado, I want to welcome Rabbi Kaminsky to share his presentation. Thank you so much.
Can you see me? Okay. We're all good. Okay, it's a pleasure and an honor to be here with you today and to take part in this webinar. Before anything, I just want to thank Rabbi Roth, the director of the Pardes Center for Judaism and Conflict Resolution, and Elisheva Bloom, the assistant director of the Pardes Center, and Joan Vanderwald, the director of the Pardes Rodef Shalom Schools program, who I've had the pleasure of working with them. And I just want to thank them for giving me this wonderful opportunity to present an overview of my book and to share some of my material with you. Also, I just want everyone to know that if it wouldn't have been for Rabbi Roth and his support and encouragement and the sponsorship of the Pardes Center, in all likelihood, my book would never have gotten published. And I just want to acknowledge that. Daniel, Rabbi Roth, I've said it many times and I'll say it again. I'm not going to ever be able to thank you enough for all that you've done for me. Anyway, on that note, let's go straight to the presentation. Okay. Let's see. Second, playing with the technology over here for the first time. Okay, 1 second. I'm going to have to close some things. Here we go. And we're not going to the next slide. Oh,
your cursor on the right screen.
There we go. There we go. Okay. I'm just going to also stop the video. You just have to listen to me for this presentation, and I'll come back for questions later. Anyway, what I'd like to do today is to give you a brief overview of my book, which is entitled Fundementals of Jewish Conflict Resolution, Traditional Jewish Perspectives on Resolving Interpersonal Conflicts. For those of you who may not be familiar with the term, interpersonal conflicts are conflicts that take place between two people, two friends, two neighbors, two co-workers, etc. So what's the book about? The publisher of the book, Academic Studies Press, uses this description in their promotional material. Fundementals of Jewish Conflict Resolution offers an in-depth presentation of traditional Jewish approaches to interpersonal conflict resolution. It examines the underlying principles, prescriptive rules, and guidelines that are found in the Jewish tradition for the prevention, amelioration, and resolution of interpersonal conflicts, without the assistance of any type of third-party intermediary. This work also includes detailed summaries of contemporary approaches to interpersonal conflict resolution, theories and research on apologies and forgiveness, and methods of anger management. Or, in simple English, the way I describe it, the book answers the question, how are you supposed to handle machloket, conflict in your life, based upon traditional Jewish sources? Now, I divided the book into 5 major sections. And these 5 sections are subdivided into 9 chapters. Let's get the chapters up. Okay. What I'd like to do with you today is to very briefly give you some basic idea of what's in each one of these chapters, and then I'll give you a chance to ask some questions. And if we still have some time, I'd actually like to go back and learn together with you some halachot that I consider to be some of the most important central components of Jewish conflict resolution, which I discuss in the book. Okay. The first chapter of the book has absolutely nothing to do with Jewish conflict resolution per se, at least not directly. As an introductory essay to the general topic of conflict resolution, I offer, number 1, an overview of contemporary conflict resolution. I discuss the different subfields of conflict resolution and modern conflict resolution's historical development over the past 70 years. And I discuss core components of conflict resolution education programs. That means to say school-based programs. That is, the programs that elementary schools, middle schools, and high schools use to teach conflict resolution skills to their students. As educators, I assume that most of you are familiar with the fact that conflict resolution education is considered a major component of what's known as SEL, social and emotional learning. Just to give you a little background, my book, as Daniel mentioned, is a revised version of my doctoral dissertation, which I did at Teachers College. For my dissertation, I did a considerable amount of research on the themes and the content of school-based conflict resolution programs. And I found that these school-based programs focus on certain core competencies or skills. Okay, I just want to share with you just 5 of the core competencies or skills that they focus on in these programs. Number 1, constructive communication. The programs try to teach students how to effectively communicate with each other. Number 2, perspective taking. Perspective taking is the ability to put yourself in someone else's place and see things from the other person's perspective. Third core component is anger management. Suffice it to say that research has shown that anger is the most prominent or pervasive emotion that's experienced in conflict, and that unfortunately it negatively affects a wide range of mental processes. It promotes bad judgment, lack of empathy, biased perceptions, misattributions, all sorts of bad stuff. Therefore, as one would expect, anger management is a prominent component of conflict resolution education. Number 4, decision-making and problem solving. An overwhelming percentage of conflict resolution programs teach some form of multi-step process for effective decision-making. That means to say how a person can decide what's the right thing to do in any given situation. B'kitzur, in a nutshell, they teach the students how to define the problem they're facing, then to come up with possible options as to how to deal with the problem, then evaluate their options, and finally to choose the most prudent course of action. And there are all different types of alternative approaches and permutations to what I just described, but that's the basic approach. And number 5, the 5th component is cooperative or collaborative negotiation, which, without going into any of the details, that teaches a person how to attain win-win solutions in a conflict. That is, a solution that's mutually beneficial to both parties. Okay, next. Okay, now we come to the Jewish material. The second chapter is divided into 2 major sections. The first major section discusses the mitzvah of Redifat Shalom, pursuing peace. And this section is subdivided into 3 smaller subsections. Number 1, what's the meaning of the word shalom, which tries to answer the question of how in Judaism do we define the concept of peace. 2, Mamrei Chazal, statements of the sages on shalom, which emphasize the importance of living in peace and harmony with people. And number 3, the chiyuv, the obligation to pursue peace, which discusses the source of the obligation. Of course, one of the most famous sources is the verse in Psalms, Bakesh Shalom V'rotfehu, you should seek peace and pursue it. And there's a whole bunch of other sources as well. And number 3b, the nature or extent of the chiyuv of pursuing peace. I touch on briefly, halakha l'maaseh, practically speaking, how far do we have to go in pursuing peace? The second major section of the chapter discusses refraining from destructive conflict, which encompasses, number 1, the first section deals with what's the meaning of the word machloket, which answers the question of how in Judaism do we define the concept of conflict. 2, Mamrei Chazal on machloket, which emphasize the destructive nature of conflict and how we're supposed to do our utmost to avoid it. And 3, the chiyuv, the obligation to refrain from machloket, which covers source of the chiyuv of the general obligation of refraining from conflict. And by the way, that obligation, if you're not familiar with the term, the sages refer to it as shelo lahachzik b'machloket, not to hold on to a conflict, that is, not to perpetuate or engage in a conflict. And 3b, the nature extent of the chiyuv. Once again, I touch on briefly, practically speaking, how far do you have to go to avoid conflict? Okay, next. Okay. The third chapter is entitled Rabbinic Perspectives on Constructive Conflict, a Dispute for the Sake of Heaven. And in it, I focus on the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot that deals with the concept of machloket l'shem shemayim, dispute for the sake of heaven, and I attempt to answer the questions of, according to the Mefarshim, the commentators on the Mishnah, what are the essential elements or characteristic features of constructive conflict? And conversely, what are the essential elements or characteristic features of destructive conflict? Okay. Now, my book focuses on halacha, Jewish law, specifically hilchot bein adam lechavero, laws of interpersonal relations. That is how you're supposed to interact with other people according to Judaism. Therefore, before I discuss mitzvot that directly relate to conflict resolution, I discuss some of the most basic fundamental mitzvot and rules of interpersonal relations in Judaism, which play an ongoing and intrinsic role throughout the process of conflict resolution. And the 6 mitzvot I discuss are, number 1, v'ahavta l'recha kamocha, should love your neighbor as yourself. 2, lo tisnat achicha b'levavecha, you should not hate your brother in your heart. 3, lo yosif pen yosif, he shall not add on, lest he strike him an additional blow, which according to the Talmud, that's the source for the prohibition against hitting another person. That is committing an act of physical violence. Number 4, v'lo tonu ish et, a man shall not hurt his friend. That's the source for the prohibition against saying hurtful things to people. 5, v'lo tisa alav chet, you shall not bear sin because of him. That's the source for the prohibition of not embarrassing someone. And number 6 is lo tikalel cheresh, you should not curse a deaf person, which is a source for the prohibition against cursing people, which in this context, cursing refers to verbally expressing a wish that someone should suffer in some way. For each one of these mitzvot, I present sources in Tanakh, the Talmud, and Midrashim, and classic halachic sources, and I discuss halacha lemasa, practically speaking, the basic halachic obligations and parameters of these 6 mitzvot. Okay. The next section of the book, that focuses on what I consider to be the basic mitzvot and laws of interpersonal conflict resolution in Judaism. I start off this section by focusing on certain halachot that are found in the Sefer Chafetz Chaim. That, of course, is the classic halachic work written by Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen, the Chafetz Chaim. Specifically, I discuss judging people favorably, countering negative judgmental biases. The concept of judging people favorably, or giving someone the benefit of the doubt, that's derived from the verse, B'tzedek tishpot amitecha, in righteousness you shall judge your friend. According to the Talmud, judging a person favorably, lechaf zuchut, towards the scale of merit, is something that falls under the category of hava'at shalom bein adam l'chavero, bringing peace between a person and his friend. Just to go back for one moment and to explain that. The subtitle of this chapter is Countering Negative Judgmental Biases. What's that all about? I cite a number of contemporary authors who assert that the purpose of this mitzvah, of judging people favorably, is to counteract prejudices, distorted perceptions, and biases towards other people that contribute to conflict. The basic idea is that by taking into consideration all of the pertinent information and facts about the questionable actions of another person, both positive and negative, and objectively analyzing them, which is what the halacha requires a person to do, you can counteract the natural human tendency to often judge other people in a harsh and negative fashion. And the halachot that the Chafetz Chaim elaborates on in his Sefer, which I spell out in this chapter, they teach a person how to do that. As far as what I exactly cover in this chapter, number 1, the Chafetz Chaim on the laws of dan l'chaf zechut, judging people favorably. 2, the concept of kabdehu v'choshdehu, you should respect him and suspect him. That concept teaches that one should show the utmost respect to a person whom one is unfamiliar with, but at the same time, you should be prudently cautious in order to protect yourself. And number 3, al tadin et chavecha ad shetagia lemekomo. Don't judge your friend until you're in his place. that you're supposed to put yourself in the other person's place and see things from the other person's perspective. I should also mention that in this chapter, I do discuss the potentially negative and harmful flip side of judging people favorably. That, of course, according to Judaism, one should not be naive and gullible and thereby justify morally reprehensible behavior. I clearly emphasize that as well. Okay. Now, in my book, what I describe as one of the most important central components of conflict resolution is tochacha, Judaism's basic approach to resolving interpersonal conflict through dialogue. I assume that we're all familiar with the concept of tochacha, of reproving or rebuking a person when a person has done something wrong or committed a sin or some misdeed. But what we may not be familiar with is that there are two separate and very different components to the mitzvah of tochacha. There is, number one, the requirement, which we're familiar with, to admonish someone who's committed a sin, even if the sin does not directly affect you on a personal level. But there's a whole other component to tochacha, and that is tochacha for interpersonal offenses, which encompasses a process for dealing with interpersonal issues through respectful and sensitive communication. That means to say that when someone has hurt you, insulted you, or provoked you in some way on a personal level, this mitzvah teaches that you're supposed to go over to that person, discuss what took place in a respectful and sensitive manner, and resolve the issue. This is something that is spelled out very clearly in halakha, and for some reason, people are not aware of this. Tochacha for interpersonal offenses is something that is so basic. I honestly believe that every Jewish child and adult should be familiar with this, specifically with just 4 halachot that are discussed by the Rambam in the Mishnah Torah. After a few slides, if we have time, which is, I question if we're going to have time, I'd like to come back and spend some time discussing this topic a little more. If we don't have time, I'd like to highly recommend for those of you who have it available that you look at Unit 6 in the Pardes Rodef Shalom Schools program, which I think does a really nice job of dealing with this topic. Okay. After tochacha, I discuss retaliation and resentment, not taking revenge and not bearing a grudge. The basic commandments of lo tikom v'lo titor. You shall not take revenge and you shall not bear a grudge. Among the topics I discuss in this chapter are the tamei hamitzvot, the rationale for these commandments, and their basic halachic parameters, specifically in relation to cases in which someone has ridiculed or insulted you. Hands down, the topic that I spend more time on in the book than any other, it's the biggest chapter, it's over 100 pages, that's apologies, the asking and granting of forgiveness. Remarkably, for some reason, which is beyond me, the all-important topics of apologizing and forgiving people in Jewish sources for some reason, haven't received the attention by contemporary authors that they most certainly deserve. Once again, I believe that the material in this chapter is something that's so important that it should be covered at some point within the course of a Jewish child's education and in every Jewish school's curriculum at some point. Okay, I like that picture. Anyway, the last chapter of my book is called Jewish Anger Management. As I mentioned earlier, we all know that anger contributes to destructive conflict in a major way, and that anger management is something that's an essential part of contemporary conflict resolution. In traditional Jewish sources, there exists a wealth of material that discusses the destructive effects of anger and offers an array of strategies for controlling it. Over 100 years ago, that's about 70 years before Raymond Novico, who's the father of contemporary anger management, had developed his approach to controlling anger, there were two seminal monographs, two books written in Hebrew on the topic of anger in traditional Jewish sources. In 1906, a book came out entitled Orech Apayim, written by Rav Avraham Yellen. And in 1911, another book was published entitled Mana Rach, which was written by Rav Moshe Levinson. Now, these two books were not only the first Jewish anthologies that specifically focused on anger, they also offered many, many eitzot, practical suggestions for controlling anger. In this chapter of my book, I discuss the strategies for anger control that appear in Orech Apayim and Mana Rach, and I compare and contrast them with the approaches of contemporary anger management. And that reminds me of something that I should have mentioned much earlier in this presentation. That's something that I actually do at the end of every chapter in the book. I try to compare and contrast the traditional Jewish approaches that I discuss in each chapter with contemporary approaches that are used in social psychology and in contemporary conflict resolution. Okay. And I finish off the book with a conclusion in which I discuss 5 topics: summary, the nature of Jewish conflict resolution, practical applications for Jewish education, similarities and differences between contemporary conflict resolution and traditional Jewish approaches, and suggestions for contemporary conflict resolution. Before I give you a chance for some questions, I want to just very briefly share with you just 1 or 2 things that I talk about in the conclusion. Based on the discussions that I've had with Jewish educators over the past 20 years, I found that, unfortunately, a very large percentage of Jewish schools simply do not offer courses in Hilchot Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, laws of interpersonal relations. Something that is so basic to Yahadut, to Judaism, something so extremely practical, which our students could really relate to and appreciate and benefit from, we don't offer them. Now, please don't get me wrong. Unquestionably, students' development in the area of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro is a major concern and emphasis of Jewish schools. No question about it. I believe that one could safely say that every Jewish day school and yeshiva out there stresses in one way or another some aspect of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. either derech eretz, midot tovot, musar, or social and emotional learning. However, generally speaking, they don't offer courses in Hilchot Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, laws of interpersonal relations. And, that could be attributed to various possible factors. All the Jewish schools are suffering from curricula overload, budgetary constraints. But in my mind, there is no doubt that one of the major contributing factors is the lack of familiarity on the part of Jewish educators with the incredible wealth of source material that exists in the area of Bein Adam L'Chaveiro. And that is a serious problem for a number of reasons, which unfortunately we don't have the time to really get into, at least not today, but there is one or two things that I would like to mention. In my research, I found that there are basic similarities between contemporary conflict resolution curricula and traditional Jewish approaches. However, I also found that there are also many significant differences between contemporary conflict resolution curricula and the traditional Jewish approaches. In certain areas, traditional Jewish approaches set higher standards than those that are found in contemporary social and emotional curricula that teach conflict resolution. And many fundamental interpersonal concepts that are found in Judaism are, generally speaking, simply ignored in the conflict resolution curricula. Just to give you two simple examples, secular conflict resolution curricula simply do not focus on apologies and forgiveness. And whenever they do briefly touch on these topics in passing, they do it in an incredibly superficial way, which really pales in comparison to the halachic material. Another good example of differences between secular curricula and traditional Jewish approaches would be in regard to ahava, love. Secular conflict resolution curricula, they don't discuss ahavat habriot, love for one's fellow human being. And certainly, of course, they would never touch on a topic like ahavat Yisrael, love for one's fellow Jew, which are some of the most basic fundamental concepts in Judaism. And they play a vital role in Jewish conflict resolution. The upshot of all this is, if we only rely on the secular models and standards of conflict resolution, which are found in contemporary social and emotional learning curricula, we're depriving our students of the profound insights and wisdom and beauty that are found in our tradition for resolving interpersonal conflicts in their lives. And we're also depriving them of a deeply meaningful and practical component of the Jewish educational experience, which they could seriously appreciate and use throughout their lives. On that note, how about we open the floor to some questions, comments, concerns, or any other feedback you might have? Let me just turn on my, my video again so you can see me. Okay, there we go. Okay, as far as questions go, hopefully I'll be able to answer your questions. If you ask me something that I can't answer off the top of my head, I'd be happy to do some research, and Mirz Hashem, I'll get back to you with an answer if I can. Okay, any questions at all?
I would ask that people check that their mics are unmuted so that they can raise questions for Dr. Kaminsky, or that you just type them into the chat room, which you can open by going to the bottom of your screen.
Okay. Okay, there's nothing.
Okay, excuse me, Rachel, did you have a question?
No, not at the moment.
Okay.
Okay. So, shall we
Rabbi, I actually do have a question,
go for it? Go for it.
and I'm willing to start with it. You mentioned that a number of Jewish schools are not doing this, and you cited the primary reason as that Jewish educators themselves may not be feeling comfortable and competent with the material. Is that?
Well, I want to take two things. First of all, it's not only some schools. You know, I've spoken to a lot of people over the past 20 years. It's the overwhelming majority of schools. Nothing. There are schools out there that have some small component of their curricula deal with Hilchot Ben Adam Lachavero, but it's minuscule. It's just, and it's unfortunately, it's somewhat superficial. And and as far as I know, I only came across one school that actually deals with the material, some of the material that I deal with in my book. But outside of that, nothing. And yeah, and there was one other part of your question. And as far as the underlying issue, I honestly believe, the Jewish educators, they're not familiar with, they haven't had the opportunity to go through this material, and they're not familiar with it. And I know that firsthand. I've shown my material to some people, and they were scratching their heads. They said, "Oh, I've never seen anything like this."
Mm-hmm.
So I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I hope that some people will want to be motivated by what you've shared with us to be able to start educating themselves.
If there are no questions or comments or anything else, I've got one last slide just to end off.
Wait, I think we do have another question, perhaps. Does someone else have a question?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, that's great. I guess a comment first. This has just been wonderful. Thank you so much for all of your efforts, and I am just so glad to be a part of it. Recently, about this Tokoka, being to reprove or to rebuke. Someone had suggested that an attitude going forward is to elevate the person rather than to see them in their nakedness. And I thought that was a really good perspective, something that has been helpful leading up to that kind of interaction with someone.
That's terrific. Thank you so much for mentioning that, because when it comes to engaging somebody and discussing these type of issues, interpersonal issues with them, you understand that you have to be extremely sensitive, and you have to know how to express your take, your perspective on the issues. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anything else? Anybody else?
Anybody else have questions? You can put it in the chat box or unmute yourself, I believe.
Shall we go to the last slide? What do you say?
Yes.
Okay, let's do it. One last slide. If I can get to the last slide. And for some reason, we're not going anywhere. Let's try that again. Oh, there we go. Okay. I just want to conclude with what I think is one of the most beautiful Mamrei Chazal statements from the rabbis that I quote in my book.
Do you have any highlights that you could, you gave us a general overview about changes, about some of the research that you found overall between contemporary conflict resolution education and between the Jewish sources. Were there any particular surprises that you had or insights that you had about some of the particular ones that you addressed when you made those comparisons?
Do you have another hour or two, Daniel? I'd be happy to spend the time. I have Rachmanis on all the other people over here. It's a fine question that would take us some time to get into. You got a whole bunch, but can we shelve that for another day? How about that?
So I'll just use it as an opportunity to emphasize, therefore, that I think the contribution of the book is not only all the Jewish wisdom, but it's just a great summary of all the contemporary conflict resolution education at the back of the book, at the back of each chapter, and the comparison, which I think is just mind-boggling. So it's great. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyway, just as far as the last slide goes, in reference to this pasuk of Bakei Shalom v'Rodef, seek peace and pursue it, the rabbis focus on what exactly is the implication of the two different expressions that are used in the verse. Bakei Shalom, you have to seek or try to find and attain peace. V'Rodef, and you also have to pursue, or literally to run after and chase peace. From this dual expression of Bakesh, V'Rodef, they deduce that a person has to try to attain peace even when it's elusive and calls for a degree of extra effort on the part of the individual. And they state as follows. You should seek it, you should seek peace with those you love and pursue it even with your enemies. You should seek it in your place and pursue it even in other places. You should seek it with your body and pursue it even with your finances. You should seek it for yourself and pursue it even for others. You should seek it today and pursue it tomorrow. In reference to the last line of you should seek it today and pursue it tomorrow, the Chafetz Chaim writes as follows. The intent of the Midrash, when it states you should pursue it tomorrow, is that one should not give up hope on attaining peace. Rather, one should pursue peace today and tomorrow and the next day until he attains it. I just want to thank you all, everyone who joined in today, for taking the time out of your daily schedules to listen to what I have to say. I hope that you found at least some of my presentation somewhat worthwhile. I thank you all so very much, and Shalom L'Kulchem.
I also just want to thank you very, very much, Chaim, for this very impressive presentation of summing up about 15 years of research and about 500 pages of in-depth study in 30 minutes. And again, encourage everyone to please take this opportunity to not only read it, but to study it and to teach it and to fulfill it in your homes and in your schools and in your shuls and in your community. Toda rabba rabba, thank you so much, and Chag Sameach as well. And I'd like